Tensions remain high in Chad, even as streets remained empty on Wednesday. This is a stark contrast from Tuesday's violent protests in which 2 people were killed and 27 others wounded. Opposition groups have, however, called for more protests. Activists opposed to the current transitional government, headed by the military, have been calling for a civilian government. The governing military council appointed Mahamat Idriss Deby to lead a transitional government after the death of his father, President Idriss Deby, last week. The new leader has called for unity amid a mounting opposition.
Each and every one of us must simply understand that all action, attitude and behavior that is contrary to national unity and to our living together in peace is a serious assault on the nation.
We're in a country where human dignity is flouted and we have had enough. We have suffered a lot and now it's enough. We want the military power to leave and to let us choose our leaders freely. We are not puppets. We are tired.
And joining us to discuss the situation in Chad is Paul Melly, Consulting Fellow for the Africa Programme at Chatham House. He joins us via Zoom from London. Paul, thank you for your time this evening. Is the opposition likely to accept the new military ruler's call for national dialogue, considering the entrenched political polarization?
That's the big question of the moment, because the father of the current interim regime leader, so the late President Idriss Deby, took a pretty harsh line with the opposition. People were often imprisoned, they were intimidated. Opposition parties, some of them had a few seats in parliament, but it wasn't a real democracy. They were basically shut out and their views were marginalized. And as a result, there's a huge trust deficit. And how the interim regime manages to convince the opposition that it is worth really buying into the transition, that there is a real prospect of some sort of move to a genuinely more democratic, more participatory political system. That's the big open question. And it's not really clear yet what the answer will be. In the aftermath of President Deby's funeral, when a number of regional leaders and of course President Macron from France were in N'Djamena, the Chadian capital, they did talk to quite a wide range of political actors in the hope of launching some sort of dialogue that would really get everybody to buy into a transition process. But the opposition are being cautious. When the new prime minister was appointed, quite a few other opposition people felt that he'd, as it were, sold out. On the other hand, he may be the sort of middling figure, somebody who both the old guard, if you like, the incumbent political structure and the opposition would be prepared to talk to. But there is a lot of trust to be rebuilt. We don't yet know how far the transition can succeed.
And that brings me to my next question, Paul, because Deby left behind a huge political void. Can his successors and opposition effectively fill it, including holding the country together?
It's not totally impossible. Chad's past history doesn't offer very encouraging portents, because even before Deby came to power, which was 30 years ago, through force, of course, Chad had suffered a series of internal conflicts. And all the time he was in power, repeatedly there were rebellions. So that would lead one to have a rather pessimistic view. On the other hand, Africa, particularly West Africa and West Central Africa, has been seeing significant change. Many of the countries to the west of Chad are now functioning democracies. There's a much more participatory political culture in the region. And we have the example of Mali, where in very different circumstances, soldiers deposed the civilian president in August, and within a very few weeks, under pressure from surrounding West African countries, agreed to a transition back to democratic elections next year. And it looks as if some of the other countries in the Sahel and France are hoping that Chad can be nudged down that path. And it may be, it's just a small possibility, but it may be that it's possible to persuade Chadians that now at last is the moment that a more consensual, a more inclusive and democratic system can be made to work. Whereas Deby himself, the late President Deby, was such an overwhelmingly dominant figure, symbolized, for example, by the fact that he took the title of Field Marshal shortly before the last election, that people didn't have much trust. They felt that they were being pushed out and excluded. The opposition were being pushed further to margins. But without his huge personality there, it may be that the military, who are currently temporarily in control, feel that they don't have that same clout, and that Deby's own son doesn't have quite the same profile and clout, that the old system couldn't be continued without the big man who dominated it. And so it's just possible that we will move towards something a bit more inclusive. How far it goes towards genuine democracy, we really can't tell at the moment, because, of course, there were a lot of people who had a stake in the old system, and working out how to, as it were, placate those vested interests while yet reaching out to wider sections of the population, for example, in the south of Chad, who've really been shut out of the political process in recent years, will be a tough challenge.
All right, Paul, we appreciate those insights. Thank you very much for joining us. Paul Melly, live for us from London.